usually we hear whispers. Maybe you heard them because you're much more on the inside around the Seahawks. But I hadn't even heard people rumoring any interest in Sam Howell. Had you?
No, not
in terms of the Seahawks' interest.
Yeah, I figured if they were going to trade for a quarterback, Justin Fields would be more likely, just because we knew that the Bears were looking to move on from Justin Fields. Now, that made more sense when it sounded like, they could actually get something of value back for him, which they didn't really do. They traded him for very little in return. And so, but even then, I mean, there was a lot of smoke about a Fields trade. Was not really a whole lot about a Howell trade, and that's one thing I'm interested to discuss with John Keim is what exactly were the Commanders' motivations for moving Howell, because, unlike Fields, I think it's two different situations where, Fields was a high draft pick. I think it made sense to really, for Chicago to really clear the table to set the stage for the new quarterback to come in. I kind of felt like Washington could have hung on to Sam Howell as a backup, but obviously they chose to go in a different direction. And so, but to answer your question, I thought that they could trade for a quarterback. I did not necessarily see Sam Howell coming.
Yeah, I agree with you that he felt like, all right, if you've determined or you feel like he's not your guy there, certainly it would be a preferable backup. I mean, he had moments where you saw him win games. You're like, okay, this guy's capable. Numbers aren't awesome. I mean, he led the league in interceptions. He led the league in sacks with an O-line whose pass rush win rate was 14th in the league. So it wasn't like, hey, they were a sieve and the guy's under siege. So there's we'll get into some of those numbers, but it just felt like, I agree that if I'm Washington or I'm a Washington fan, I'm thinking, why wouldn't you hang on to this guy as a backup and go get the guy you think is your future? Yeah,
I wonder if part of the motivation, and again, we'll get John Keim's take on this, but I wonder if part of the motivation was, wanting to avoid a situation where the new guy comes in, whether that's Drake May or somebody else, a highly drafted quarterback comes in and feels like because he's now playing ahead of the starter last year, a guy who was, by all accounts, a pretty popular guy in the locker room, Sam Howell, because he was so tough and because he helped them win some games. I wonder if they wanted to avoid a situation where the new quarterback felt like he kind of had to be looking over his shoulder at all times and felt like, God, if I make this mistake, then are people going to be clamoring to put Sam Howell back in there? And maybe another element to that, I wonder, could be like the idea that, he's this new guy coming in and he's got to, quote unquote, win over, teammates who were Sam Howell guys. Because again, Sam Howell, I've talked to John Keim off the air about this. Like, Sam Howell is a tough dude, and I think he gained a lot of respect from teammates there, especially the O-linemen, with how he would hang in there, and the offensive coordinator would have him throw the ball 40-plus times some games, and he took a beating there, and he kept showing up to work every day. And so I think he made a lot of he had a lot of support in that locker room, and I wonder if Washington might have felt like that would be a tough situation to have a highly drafted guy come in and maybe feel like, he's got to win over some of these teammates who were, quote unquote, Howell guys.
Well, we talked to John Schneider this week about this on the heels of this move, and talked about how excited they were to get him and that he will be a backup to Geno.
Young, he's 23 years old and has 18 starts, in the league already, and he's the same age as like Daniels from LSU and Rattler and Penix, and he's a year younger than Bo Nix, and so. We're just really excited to be able to acquire him, and we know he's a serious dude, and he's into it. He works his tail off. We got great reviews on him, and we loved him coming out of college. So we're happy to get him in the mix, and Geno is the guy, and Sam will be backing him up.
So he said that there, and then he goes on a little further to clarify that they aren't signing him to be a starter here.
Well, I'm sure there's competition, but as of right now, I mean, Geno, it's not like we're signing him to go and compete with Geno to be the starter, but I'm sure he's going to be given it a run. He's a competitive guy.
Should he be given the chance to compete?
Well, first of all, good on you for asking the follow-up and getting further clarification on that. So he did say twice that Howell is coming in to back up Geno. I think it's interesting, Bob, that this is now the first time we have really heard either John Schneider or Mike McDonald come out and say Geno is the guy and really give anything close to a commitment to Geno being the starter next year. And I don't think it's a coincidence that only now comes after, basically the way I look at it is the most realistic window for them to trade Geno, it's come and gone. So I still think there's a non-zero chance that they trade him. It still could happen, but the most realistic time would have been before, the start of free agency, just because now teams have started filling their spots. They've, spent, their money. They sort of have their salary cap kind of in order, and, they would have to take on a sizable contract in Smith. So again, I don't rule it out now, but I think the most realistic time has sort of passed. And so I don't think it's coincidence that only now you are hearing them say, yeah, Geno is the starter, because the way I see it is I think that they have been keeping, or at least had been keeping, that door open to possibly move on from him and just didn't really get any takers. And so, and I also think that, look, Geno's kind of been, dangling in the wind a little bit. And there's been all this speculation, and some of which has been fueled by things that Schneider and McDonald have said. And they've had a lot of opportunities to really shoot that down and say Geno is the guy. But again, they've only did that recently. Schneider only did that last week. And so whether he should or should not compete with Sam Howell, I mean, I think there's people in the building who think that Howell has what it takes to, both in terms of talent and just the attitude, that he has what it takes to push Geno for that job. I just kind of think Schneider, whether it was Schneider or McDonald, had to come out and throw some sort of support for Geno to say that he's the guy, just because, again, after all the speculation that's already been happening, then you trade for a quarterback who's been a starter. I kind of felt like they felt like they had to throw Geno a bone almost and say, yeah, to take some of that speculation away.